Happy Tuesday, everyone. Thought I would do something a little bit different today because I know it's the new year, and one of the things that people like to do is create affirmations for themselves. And affirmations, have a purpose, but quite often they can actually make us feel worse. And so here's something else we can do instead. So let me start off by saying, if you've ever wanted to feel better, and so you've done like some affirmations, and then you've done that and it just actually makes you feel worse. Don't worry, it's done that to me as well, and there's not something wrong with you, right? So one of the things is, right, that affirmations often don't work for people who've had trauma in their life or neglect in their life, right? So if you experience any of those things, then affirmations can actually be really triggering. And what they tend to do is they can actually trigger old trauma. So things like, you saying, I'm worthy or I can do this, can trigger all the memories of where you aren't worthy or where you couldn't do something, right? And this is particularly important to unpack, right, if you're going to make a change, because sometimes what sits at the heart of that is some old things that are sitting below at a deep emotional level that we kind of need to unpack. And, affirmations on the surface then, they won't work because they often lead to bypassing, denying feelings, and us feeling like an imposter, right? So they actually make us feel worse. And what it does then is it actually makes us feel more disconnected to ourselves and less connected to what we want to achieve. So if you're trying to make a change, this can be quite a big roadblock for you. And so here's something you can do instead, right? And this was touched on, I don't know if you saw the TED Talks that I had posted or reposted here as well around, procrastination, right? Because procrastination is one of those coping tools when we're, again, being triggered by something, right? And so one of the things there was things like self-compassion. So empathy and validation are always going to be more helpful than affirmations for where we've got issues of trauma and neglect coming up for us. And things like safety, regulation, self-soothing, any acts of kindness to yourself will do all of those things and can be a much more effective strategy than affirmations. And so how do we do this? Well, one of the things that we can do is take action that makes you feel healthy, met and loved. So basically, you could go for a walk, you could hug a tree if that's what you like doing, pet a dog. I always like doing that. Make love. Who doesn't like doing that? Play a game, dance. All of these things can actually be better than affirmations. And they don't always have to be fluffy self-care activities as well, right? They can be something a little bit more tangible. That's actually something that you need. So it could be like going and doing some exercise or catching up with a friend or something like that. It doesn't always have to be this kind of, fluffy, let's go have a bathtub and have a glass of wine. But it's not all the same thing, right? But what they do, though, is when you take an action like this, what they can do is they unhook the brain from being stuck in this kind of like loop and obsessional thoughts that make you feel bad about yourself, right? So say, for example, you're feeling something like, if you're thinking something like, oh, I'm so stupid, why did I do that? Or I'm bad. So instead of saying, oh, no, you are great, and I am good, and I'm really smart. Those sorts of things and affirmations, like all you're going to do is kind of create this internal war with yourself and your ego, right? It's not going to get you anywhere. But instead, if we actually take a minute and actually empathize with that criticism or that inner voice, and say something like, for example, it makes sense that you think that you're bad, given that you were criticized, made wrong, and parentified. You didn't deserve to be treated that way. Had you had the security, skill, growing, and encouragement, you'd feel differently. So let's just take a breath here, get safe, and we can take one step towards shifting this. So what you're doing is you're kind of talking to yourself around, you're kind of parenting yourself, right? You're acknowledging that there's an emotion there. You're acknowledging how you're actually feeling, which then kind of releases the power that has over you. And then you're thinking about, well, why don't we just validate the fact that you were feeling that way? But instead of giving yourself a pass, so this is where people kind of get stuck, because they sort of take, oh, well, this is like an opportunity to potentially kind of skip over again and give themselves a pass. It's not about that, because you'll see in that second part of that conversation, it's about actually going, okay, well, let's just take one small action now, and then let's think about how we can go around this problem, or go around this, or take one step towards actually releasing this, right? And what you're doing is you're calming the brain down, taking that emotion away, and having a think about how you'd like to do. So basically, you are basically kind of bringing to the surface some of your subconscious patterns and choosing something differently. Now, yeah, it takes a bit of work and can be a bit uncomfortable at times, but when you get in the habit of meeting yourself where you're at, you start bringing yourself to understanding and moving towards creating a life or healthy habits that's good for you, right? And no one else is going to do that for you. And it's going to be better served coming from yourself anyway, because if we're always relying on external validation, then we're always going to come unstuck, right? And who do we listen to the most? Well, we're stuck with our thoughts most of the day. So we want to be sure that we can actually have that conversation with ourselves when we need to move past, right? So I guess, empathy is a bit of a nectar in that sense. It can make us know that what we feel is valid, but it doesn't necessarily it's not sympathy, right? And it's not babying us as well. So yeah, I hope you found that that helpful, because I know these things are actually quite important when if you find yourself using food for comfort, or procrastinating when you should get to the gym, or putting off something that you need to do. Then sometimes that internal dialogue will start, or what we'll do, maybe we'll start to get anxious and we'll start to feel really bad for ourselves, and we'll start beating ourselves up, right? Which actually doesn't help us move forward to what we're trying to achieve. So we need to, take the time to actually listen to that, unpack it, and overcome those roadblocks, because the more you get into the habit of that, then the more you become unstoppable and the more you become resilient, and you can actually achieve those things that you set out for. So I hope that was helpful and you got something out of that. Let me know in the comments, maybe what your favourite feel-good activity is to show kindness to yourself. Cheers.